I stared at my bank account at the two-digit number. $17. My name is Mia Campbell, and that was all my family had left me. For years, I was the fixer, the ghost in the halls of our sprawling family home on Hemlock Lane, the one who paid the bills no one else would. I had one secret, a $4,000 escape fund. And they took it. They took it all. But what I didn't know was that the $17 was just the beginning. The real betrayal was bigger, older, and buried right under their feet. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Most people have a place in their family, a role. My older brother Marcus was the success. My younger sister Chloe was the project. My parents Richard and Carol were the audience. And me, I was the stage manager. The one who made sure the lights were on, the bills were paid, and the curtains opened on time. The one no one ever sees or ever thanks. At 28, I was a ghost defined only by my utility haunting the edges of my own life. It started as it always did, with a phone call. "Ms. Campbell," the bank manager said, his voice oozing a practiced impersonal sympathy. "As we discussed last week, the mortgage payment for 124 Hemlock Lane is now 60 days past due. If we don't receive payment, we'll be forced to initiate foreclosure proceedings." I was sitting in my cramped one-bedroom apartment, the only space that felt like mine. I looked at my own laptop, at my own meticulously managed spreadsheets. "I understand," I said, my voice flat. "I will be making a payment today, Mr. Harrison. You'll have it by 5. I didn't say I would be making the payment. I didn't say it was my father's mortgage. He knew. I knew he knew. I hung up and transferred the money from my personal savings. Again. The drive to Hemlock Lane was a familiar kind of purgatory. The house was a sprawling, white-columned relic of a past we couldn't afford, a monument to my mother's obsession with appearances. I parked behind Marcus's gleaming black BMW. My mother Carol was in the garden, snipping at her prize-winning roses with a vicious precision. She didn't look up. "Mia, your jacket is unfortunate." "Hi, Mom." I moved past her. The air was thick with the cloying smell of rose fertilizer and quiet judgment. Marcus was on the porch phone, pressed to his ear, laughing loudly about some case he'd won. He was 31, the golden boy, a high-status lawyer who still lived at home. He saw me, motioned me over, and without missing a beat in his conversation, dropped a small white paper tag into my open hand. His dry cleaning bill. I nodded just once and tucked it into my pocket. Inside, the house was silent and dim. "Chloe," I called out. Nothing. I went up the stairs, my feet silent on the plush runner I'd paid to have cleaned last month. Her door was ajar. She was buried under a duvet, the room a hurricane of tissues, clothes, and empty ice cream cartons. "Chloe, are you okay?" A muffled sob. "He broke up with me, Mia. He just left." "I'm sorry, Chloe." I began to gather the dishes, the sticky spoons. She was 21, perpetually fragile, a professional victim who had perfected the art of weaponizing her incompetence. Can you just handle it?" she whispered. "I can't. I just can't." "I'll handle it," I said. I tidied her room, took out the trash, and went to my father's study. Richard was staring at a blank computer screen, a glass of whiskey sweating on the desk. He looked up, his eyes weak and unfocused. "It's handled, Dad," I said, showing him the bank confirmation on my phone. He just nodded, relieved he wouldn't have to be the one to tell Carol. As I was leaving, I passed the formal dining room. On the sideboard sat a small framed photo of my grandfather, my mother's father. He was the only one who ever really saw me. He'd passed away when I was 21, leaving me a small trust, as my parents called it. It was supposed to vest on my 25th birthday 3 years ago. I remembered the day clearly. I'd waited all evening. They'd forgotten. When I finally gently brought it up, my mother had waved her hand dismissively, a brittle smile on her face. "Oh, Mia, it's just paperwork. Don't be grasping. It's not a lot. We'll handle it for you. It's safer that way. I never saw a single document. I never asked again. I just learned to be quiet. I drove back to my apartment, the tension in my shoulders so constant it felt like a part of my spine. I paid Marcus's dry cleaning bill online. I ordered Chloe groceries. I was depleted, numb. I was the family's invisible manager, and my salary was their conditional, paper-thin tolerance. My only secret, the only thing that was truly mine, was a high-yield savings account. My escape fund. I'd been building it for years, $50 here, $100 there, every time I took an extra freelance bookkeeping gig. It wasn't much, just over $4,000, but it was mine. It was the seed of a future where I wasn't just a function but a person. I logged into my personal bank account, ready to transfer my latest $75 payment to myself. And I froze. The balance was wrong. It was horrifyingly wrong. I scrolled down the transaction history, my heart hammering a cold, sick rhythm against my ribs. There. A withdrawal. Made 2 days ago. The amount, $4,000. The memo line was one word: Chloe. I stared at the screen. I stared at the new balance. $17.21. They had found my secret. They had taken my one tiny seed of a future and crushed it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The numbness that had been my shield for decades suddenly evaporated, and what was left behind was a terrible cold clarity. It was like a switch had been thrown deep inside my chest, a heavy iron lever that clanged into place. And I knew with the kind of certainty that burns that I was done. My feet didn't feel like my own as I walked from my car back to the house on Hemlock Lane. The bank statement was crumpled in my fist, the paper damp with my sweat. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The sound of their laughter hit me first, rolling out from the formal dining room. Laughter. I had $17 in my account, my entire future had been stolen, and they were laughing. I walked in. They were all there, crystal glasses raised high. A champagne bottle sat in a silver bucket. "To Marcus," my father was saying, his voice unusually bright. "Making partner. We always knew you would." Marcus was leaning back in his chair, a king accepting his due. Carol was beaming, a perfect portrait of maternal pride. Even Chloe was smiling, her recent trauma apparently forgotten. They didn't see me for a moment. I was just the stage manager entering from the wings. Then my mother's eyes flicked to me. Her smile tightened. "Mia, what is it now we're celebrating?" "You took my money," I said. My voice was a dead thing, a dry rustle in the opulent room. The laughter stopped. "You took $4,000 from my savings account." Chloe's eyes went wide and she looked at my mother. Marcus sighed, annoyed by the interruption. My father studied the intricate pattern on the damask tablecloth. "I want to know why," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. I unfolded the bank statement and threw it on the table. It landed next to the champagne bucket. Carol was the one to speak. Her voice was ice cold. "Mia, do not make a scene. Your brother is celebrating." "A scene?" I repeated, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. "A scene? You stole all of my money." "It's just money," Carol said, her eyes narrowing. "You can make more." Chloe was in a bad place. She needed new furniture for her apartment. She was distraught. We couldn't have her living like that. "So you stole from me?" Marcus finally laughed. It was a short barking sound. "God, Mia, grow up. It's not that big a deal. It's family money, isn't it? Stop being so dramatic." "It was my money," I whispered, looking from face to face. "It was mine." My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He just picked up his champagne glass and took a long, slow drink. And in that moment, I saw them. I mean, I really saw them. Not as my family, but as a collection of strangers. A narcissist, an enabler, a golden boy sociopath, and a bottomless pit of need. They weren't just indifferent. They were hostile. They saw my small private hope as a resource to be plundered. My mother's cold dismissal, my father's cowardice, my brother's contempt. It was the final fatal blow. I looked at them one by one. I didn't say another word. I didn't cry. I just turned around. I walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door. I got in my car, I put the key in the ignition, and I drove. I didn't have a plan, I just drove. I got on the highway and pointed the car south. I had my purse, the clothes I was wearing, and $17. The first hour was a blur. The second, my hands started shaking so hard I had to grip the wheel. By the third hour, the cold, sharp clarity had been replaced by a tidal wave of panic. What had I done? Where was I going? I had no money. No one. But the thought of turning back was worse. The thought of walking back into that house defeated. No, I would rather die. So I kept driving. I drove for 6 hours, the needle on the gas gauge dropping past E. The low fuel light had been on for 30 miles when I finally pulled off the highway, rolling into a small, unfamiliar town in North Carolina. The engine sputtered and died right as I pulled into a parking spot on the main street. Silence. I slept in my car. It was a cold, cramped, humiliating night. The next morning, I found a public restroom and splashed water on my face. I looked like a ghost. I went to the ATM at a local bank and pulled out the $1,700. It wasn't enough for a tank of gas. I looked at the laptop bag on my passenger seat, my work laptop. I walked 3 blocks to a pawn shop and sold it for $150. It was a terrible deal, but it was enough for gas and food. I sat in my car in a gas station parking lot eating a stale protein bar. I checked my phone. It was still on, still silent. No missed calls, no texts, not one. I waited. Surely my father. Surely someone would call. The day passed. Nothing. The next day I drove further south, checking my phone at every stop. Nothing. Days blurred into a week. My phone's battery died. I bought a cheap charger at a truck stop. Still nothing. The silence was the answer. It was the confirmation. I hadn't just left. I had vanished and they hadn't even noticed. A week after I'd left, I stood in the town square of another place I'd never heard of with maybe $40 left to my name. My phone was a dead weight in my pocket. I had no family. I had no home. I had no future. I was completely, terrifyingly free. And I realized with a sudden hollow jolt that they weren't looking for me. They had already forgotten me. 5 years. 1,825 days. That's how long it takes to build a new life from the studs up. That's how long it takes to kill the ghost of the girl who drove south with $17 and a hole where her family used to be. Today, at 33, I am not that girl. I am Mia Campbell, co-owner of The Daily Rise, the best bakery and cafe in Laurel Springs, North Carolina. I live in a world that smells like fresh ground coffee, caramelized sugar, and yeast. I live in a world I built with my own hands. I found this town by accident, but I stayed on purpose. I'd walked into the original Daily Rise with my last $20 just looking for a cup of coffee and a place to think. Instead, I saw a dishwasher wanted sign. Maria Rodriguez, the owner, was a woman built like a small, sturdy oak with eyes that saw everything. She hired me on the spot, not out of pity, but because she saw the desperation and beneath it, the grit. "You look like you know how to work," she'd said. "We work here." And I worked. I washed dishes until my hands were raw. I scrubbed floors. I learned to prep. Maria, seeing something in my quiet diligence, took me under her wing. She was the mentor I never had, sharp and warm and fiercely protective. She taught me how to laminate dough, how to balance a ledger, how to command a kitchen. I went from dishwasher to apprentice, from apprentice to manager. 2 years ago, when she wanted to semi-retire, she didn't sell. She made me her partner. "You earned this, mija," she said, signing the papers. "This place is as much you as it is me." My new life brought new people. Real people. Ben Carter was the contractor we hired to renovate the cafe 2 years back. He was the antithesis of my family, quiet, capable, and profoundly honest. He was the kind of man who did what he said he would do when he said he would do it. He was grounded solid. He'd come in for coffee every morning, sawdust on his jeans, a pencil behind his ear. He'd watch me manage the morning rush, his eyes crinkling at the corners when I smiled at a customer. He never pushed, never demanded. He just saw me. Our relationship was a slow burn, built on mutual respect and late-night talks over blueprints. He represented a stability I had never known. I am a different person now. The old Mia was a shadow of function. This Mia is confident. She pays her own bills. She signs other people's paychecks. She's respected in this community. She is for the first time in her entire existence genuinely happy. It was a strange, fragile feeling at first, this happiness. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop for the trick, but it never did. The only trick was believing I never deserved it in the first place. The silence from my family was absolute. It was a closed wound, a scar that had long since faded, from angry red to pale white. I never changed my phone number. For the first year, I'd left it on out of some morbid, painful curiosity. I'd flinched at every unknown call. But they never called. My 30th birthday came and went. Nothing. 5 Christmases passed, each one celebrated at Maria's house, surrounded by warmth and laughter. Nothing. I grieved them. I grieved the idea of them, the mother and father and siblings I should have had. I went through the anger, the sorrow, and finally the acceptance. They weren't just neglectful. They were gone. And I in turn let them go. I had my found family. I had Maria. I had Ben. It was more than enough, which is why this moment felt so perfect. Ben and I were in the small rental house I'd lived in for 4 years, but we were surrounded by blueprints. We were designing our house, a home we were going to build on a small parcel of land just outside of town. It would be ours from the foundation to the rafters. I think the kitchen window needs to be bigger, I said, tapping the plans. I want to see the whole valley. Bigger it is. He smiled, dusting his hands on his jeans. We were laughing, covered in sawdust from a wood sample he'd brought over. My phone charging on the counter buzzed. A text. I glanced at it, my heart full, my mind on floor plans. And then I saw it. An unknown number. But the area code. My breath caught. 203. My old area code. The one I hadn't seen in half a decade. My heart didn't just drop. It froze mid-beat, a solid block of ice in my chest. After 1,825 days of absolute deafening silence, they had found me. Ben saw the blood drain from my face. Mia, what is it? The phone buzzed again this time, an incoming call from the same 203 number. The laughter and sawdust vanished. The air in my small, safe kitchen turned thin and cold. Who is that? Ben asked, his voice low. I don't know. I lied. The phone stopped ringing. My hands were shaking. I'm Mia Campbell, co-owner of a business. A woman who commanded a kitchen staff and negotiated with suppliers, was trembling like a child. A voicemail notification popped up. I tapped it, my thumb moving with a will of its own. I put the phone on speaker. A man's voice filled the room. A voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice that instantly hollowed me out. Mia, honey, it's Dad. Please pick up. It's important. We just want to talk to you. Please call me back. The call ended. Ben and I stared at the phone. That's your father, he stated. Not a question. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The phone immediately rang again. Same number. I looked at Ben. His jaw was set. Answer it, Mia, or don't, but you're not doing it alone. I took a breath. I pressed the green icon. Hello. Mia? Oh, Mia? Thank God. My father's voice, Richard Campbell, cracked with a strained artificial warmth. It was a performance. I knew that voice. It was the one he used on bank managers and angry clients. "Honey, is that really you? We've been so worried, honey. You just vanished." I said nothing. My blood was turning to ice. My hand gripped the counter's edge, my knuckles white. Worried. "5 years, Mia." He went on, his voice thick with fake pity. 5 years. Your mother. She's just been beside herself. We didn't know what happened. We thought, God, we didn't know what to think. It's been so hard on us." Hard on you. The gaslighting was so immediate, so reflexive, it almost took my breath away. There was no apology. No, "We're sorry we stole your money." No, "We're sorry we didn't notice you were gone for a month." Just an accusation wrapped in a hug. "Why are you calling Dad?" I asked. My voice was cold, colder than I'd intended. He cleared his throat, the performance shifting. This was the real reason. "Listen, honey. We need you to come home." He paused, letting the words hang. It's your mother. She's not well, Mia. She's sick. And she's been asking for you." My stomach twisted. The old obligation, that deep toxic root I thought I'd ripped out, gave a painful throb. My mother. Sick. What's wrong with her?" I asked, hating the flicker of fear in my own voice. It's complicated," he hedged. She needs you. She needs all of us. Please, Mia, it's time to come home. Just for a little while." I hung up. I told him I'd call him back. Ben was watching me, his expression unreadable. "What do you think?" I whispered. "I think," he said slowly, "that a woman who was beside herself with worry would have found a way to call you in 5 years. What kind of sick? He wouldn't say, just not well." I told Maria later that evening, the three of us in my kitchen, the blueprints forgotten. Maria, true to form, snorted. "Be careful, mija," she said, her sharp eyes fixed on me. "A sick woman who hasn't called in 5 years. That sounds like a trap. What do they really want?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But what if she is? What if she's dying?" The old Mia, the stage manager, was whispering that it was my duty to go. But the new Mia, the business owner, was screaming that this was a lie. I was torn. "I have to go," I said, finally, the words tasting like ash. "I have to see. If I don't, I'll never know. And if it's true—" I couldn't finish. "Then I'm going with you," Ben said immediately. It wasn't a request. "I am not letting you walk into that den alone. We drive up, we see what's wrong, and we leave. On our terms." I agreed. I wasn't the broken 28-year-old. I was a 33-year-old woman with a life, a business, and a partner. I called my father back. I was cold, professional. "I'll be there Saturday. I'll stay for 1 hour. I'm bringing Ben." There was a long silence. "Ben, my partner," I said. "Take it or leave it." He sputtered. "Of course, honey, of course. Just come home." The 8-hour drive north was a silent, creeping dread. Ben held my hand for most of it. But when we turned onto Hemlock Lane, I felt like my skin was trying to crawl off my body. The house looked smaller, meaner. The paint was peeling. The once manicured lawn was patchy and overgrown with weeds. And the prize-winning roses, they were dead, just a tangle of black, thorny sticks. We pulled into the driveway, and there on the porch stood my sick mother, Carol. She was wearing tailored slacks and a silk blouse, a cigarette dangling from her fingers, looking perfectly, horrifyingly healthy. She watched us get out of the car, her eyes as cold and flat as a shark's. She took a long drag, the cherry glowing in the gloom, and blew a plume of smoke. She flicked the ash onto the dead lawn. "Mia," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You're late. And you brought a friend." The air in the foyer was stale thick with the smell of dust and something sour I couldn't place. Desperation. That's what it was. Ben's hand rested on the small of my back, a solid warm presence that kept me from turning and running. In the dining room, Mia, Carol said, gesturing with her cigarette. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. We walked in and my stomach clenched. This was no sickbed reunion. This was an ambush. Marcus was there pacing by the window, his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale and slick with sweat. Chloe was huddled in a chair in the corner, picking at her cuticles, looking smaller and meaner than I remembered. And at the head of the long, polished table sat a man I'd never seen before. He was in a cheap, shiny suit, his briefcase open in front of him. He had the weary, hunted look of a lawyer who knows his clients are guilty. "Well, this is cozy," Ben said, his voice a low rumble. He pulled out a chair for me, but neither of us sat. My father, Richard, wouldn't look at me. He just moved to stand behind my mother's chair like a footman. Carol crushed out her cigarette in a delicate china saucer. The act was violent. "Your father was indelicate," she said, her voice like chipped ice. "I'm fine, obviously, but the family is not. Sit down. We need to talk." "I think I'll stand," I said. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Fine. We don't have time for pleasantries. Mr. Davies, please explain the situation to Mia." The lawyer Davies cleared his throat and shuffled his papers. "Ms. Campbell, your family is in a significant financial predicament. Your father's business, Campbell Imports, is insolvent." "That business closed 10 years ago," I said, confused. "It was repurposed," Marcus snapped, turning from the window, "as a holding company for investments." "Bad investments," Davies corrected, his eyes on his papers. "Very bad investments, coupled with significant personal debts." He was looking right at Marcus, who looked like he was about to be sick. "Your brother is being sued for malpractice and embezzlement. He leveraged client funds to cover gambling losses." The room went silent. I looked at Marcus, the golden boy. Not just an arrogant lawyer, but a common thief, a gambler who had bet his family's future and lost. "They're going to lose everything," Davies continued, his voice flat. "The bank is calling all outstanding loans. They have attachments on every known asset. This house is the last firewall." "So you lied?" I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, rising rage. "You lied about Mom being sick to get me here, to ask me for money." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Mia," Carol sneered. "We don't want your money. We know you don't have any." She nodded to the lawyer. "Mr. Davies, the other matter." Davies swallowed, looking profoundly uncomfortable. He pulled a thick vellum document from his stack. "Yes, which brings us to your grandfather's trust." He slid it across the table toward me. "The trust your parents have been managing on your behalf." "My grandfather? You told me it was just paperwork," I said, remembering her dismissive wave. "We simplified things," Carol said. "It wasn't small, was it?" I asked, a horrifying suspicion dawning. Davies looked at Carol, who gave a sharp nod. "No, Miss Campbell, it was not." He tapped the front page. "Your grandfather, William, was a very astute man. He saw, well, he structured his will very specifically. He left his entire personal fortune to your mother, but his primary residence, this house, 124 Hemlock Lane, and the 40 acres of land it sits on, he left to you, free and clear." I couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked from the room. "What? The trust vested on your 25th birthday." The lawyer continued, his voice a monotone drone. "Legally, this property, this house, the land, everything. It has all belonged to you and you alone for the past 8 years. 8 years. 8 years. I looked around the room at the peeling wallpaper, the dusty chandelier. They had been living in my house. They had been paying my mortgage, or rather not paying it with my money. They had been squatters. They had lied to me my entire life. And now, Carol said, leaning forward, her eyes glittering like black stones. "You're going to give it back." "Mr. Davies has the papers," my father murmured, finally speaking. "We need you to sign the house over to us, Mia, to the family. We'll use it as collateral to pay off Marcus's debts. It's the only way. It's the only thing that can save us." I stared at them. The betrayal was so vast, so complete. It was almost elegant. It was a perfect dark thing. "You lied to me," I whispered. "For 8 years, you stole from me. You let me leave with $17, and you were living in my house." Carol's face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. "We had to hide it, Mia. Don't you see? You were so fragile, so unformed. You couldn't have handled the pressure of owning something like this. Marcus needed a stable base. Chloe needed security. It was for your own protection. We did it for you." She pointed a long, bony finger at the documents Davies was sliding next to the trust. "Now be a good daughter for once in your life and sign the papers." I looked down at the document. My name was printed in stark black ink. Mia Campbell, sole beneficiary. I saw all of it. The forgotten birthdays, the dry cleaning bills, the stolen $4,000, the 5 years of absolute silence. All of it a long, calculated campaign to keep me small, to keep me broken so I would never be strong enough to ask this one simple question. My father slid a cheap ballpoint pen across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of my hand. "It's for the family, Mia," he pleaded, his voice a pathetic whine. I looked at their faces, not sorry, not ashamed, just hungry, waiting. Ben's hand was still on my back. I picked up the pen. My hand was perfectly, completely steady. "No," I said. The room stopped breathing. "No." The word was small, but it shattered the room. It landed on the polished table with the weight of an anchor. For a long, stunned second, there was only the sound of Chloe's sniffling and the hum of the old house. Marcus, who had been staring at Ben with open contempt, turned his head slowly toward me. His face, already pale and slick, began to suffuse with a mottled, ugly red. "What? What did you just say?" He spat, his voice a low growl. "I said no," I repeated, my voice clear and steady. The pen was still in my hand. He exploded. It wasn't a shout. It was a roar of pure, cornered animal rage. "You ungrateful bitch!" He lunged, not at the table, but at me, his hands clawed. He was fast fueled by a lifetime of entitlement and the sudden terrifying prospect of consequences. But Ben was faster. Ben wasn't a brawler, he was a builder. He moved with a solid physical certainty, a knowledge of leverage and force. He intercepted Marcus mid-lunge. He didn't throw a punch. He met Marcus's momentum with his own, his hand grabbing Marcus's shoulder, his other arm barring his chest. It was a builder's shove, precise and powerful. Ben used Marcus's own forward-moving rage against him, pivoting and slamming him bodily into the dining room wall. Plaster cracked and sifted to the floor. A framed photograph of the perfect family, taken years ago, crashed from its hook, the glass shattering. The room imploded. Carol shrieked a high, piercing sound like a kettle boiling over a sound of pure, thwarted malice. After everything we have done for you, you would ruin us. You would kill your mother." Chloe, seeing her shield and provider neutralized against the wall, erupted. She wasn't just crying. She was wailing a performative, gulping, hysterical sound. "But what about me? What's going to happen to me? You can't do this." My father, Richard, just stumbled back, his hands fluttering at his chest, his face the color of wet ash, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Enough!" I didn't shout. But my voice, forged in 5 years of 70-hour work weeks of commanding a kitchen staff during a full-scale dinner rush, cut through the noise like a cleaver. The wailing choked off into a gasp. The shriek died in Carol's throat. Marcus, pinned against the wall by Ben's forearm, his face inches from the cracking plaster, froze. My father stopped fluttering. They all stared at me. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the hardwood. The room was mine. Done for me. I said, my voice heavy, not loud but vibrating with a rage so cold it burned the air. Let's talk about what you've done for me. I looked at Carol, my mother. You did everything you could to make me invisible. You made me the family janitor, the stage manager, the fixer. The only time you ever saw me was when something was broken or a bill was due. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a servant. I turned my eyes to my father. And you let her. You stood by and watched her erase me day after day because you were too weak to be a father, too much of a coward to be a husband. You just wanted a quiet life no matter who it cost. You want to talk about money? My voice rose, and I saw Chloe flinch. Let's talk about $17. That's what you left me. You, my mother, my father, you saw my one tiny secret hope for a future. My $4,000, the only thing that was mine. And you plundered it. You stole it to buy furniture for the fragile one. You left me with $17 and didn't even have the decency to tell me. My gaze swept back to all of them. And when I left, when I drove away with nothing but $17 and a quarter tank of gas, you didn't call, you didn't text. Not once. Not for my 30th birthday. Not for 5 Christmases. 5 years of absolute deafening silence. You didn't know if I was alive or dead. You want to know the truth. You didn't care. You didn't call because you didn't notice. I took a step closer to the table toward the trust. And now I finally find out why you didn't care. Because for 8 years, you have been living in my house, lying to me, suppressing a will, committing fraud. You let me scrub floors and pay your mortgage while you sat on my asset. I looked at Carol. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a janitor. You wanted a bank account. And you wanted a ghost one who would never be smart enough or strong enough to ask the right questions. You didn't protect me, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in. You used me. You tried to keep me small. You tried to keep me fragile, just like her. I gestured to Chloe. So I would never have the strength to stand up to you. But you failed. I was fragile. I was broken. But you didn't break me. You forged me. You burned away all the weakness. You taught me how to survive on nothing. And I got very, very good at it. I turned my back on them. It was a profound act of dismissal, and I felt their stunned silence on my shoulder blades. I faced the lawyer Davies, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice all business. Just to be perfectly crystal clear for the record, is this document, the last will and testament of my grandfather, legal and binding? Davies, sweating through his cheap suit, could only nod his eyes, darting to Carol. Yes, Ms. Campbell, it is. And is this house and the 40 acres it sits on 100% legally mine, effective as of my 25th birthday? Yes, he stammered. Unequivocally, it is your sole property. Good. I pulled out my phone. My hands were rock steady. I unlocked the screen. Ben, what was the name of that high-end realtor in town? The one you said was a shark? Ben, without taking his eyes or his arm off. Marcus replied, Cynthia Lowell, Lowell Properties. My family watched in horror-struck silence as I found the number on Google and dialed. The phone rang once. Hi, Cynthia? I said, my voice suddenly bright and professional, the voice I used with my suppliers. My name is Mia Campbell. I'm the sole owner of 124 Hemlock Lane. Yes, the old Campbell estate. Yes, it's a beautiful property. It is. And I'd like to list it for immediate sale. Cynthia, hang on 1 second, I said, putting the phone on mute. Ben had finally released Marcus, who stumbled back, clutching his chest, wheezing. Ben walked over to me, pulling out his phone. He looked at my family, a cold, polite, professional smile on his face. Actually, honey, don't, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. It'll take too long. Commissions, inspections, open houses. They'll find a way to file an injunction, tie it up in court for years. We need to move faster. He looked at Mr. Davies man to man. My development group, Carter Homes, will buy the property. All cash, let's say 20% below market value given the distress and the extensive obvious repairs needed. He glanced meaningfully at the cracked plaster on the wall. I'll have my lawyer draft a standard contract and wire the deposit within the hour. We can close in 48 hours. The air left the room. It wasn't just shock, it was comprehension. My family's faces didn't just fall, they crumbled. My father's knees buckled and he sagged into a chair. Chloe's performative wail turned into a thin, strangled gasp. Marcus just stared, his mouth slack, the math clicking into place behind his dead eyes. They finally understood. They weren't just losing the house. They weren't just losing their last lifeline. They were losing it to him, to us. We weren't just taking back what was mine. We were profiting from their destruction. Carol's face, the one she'd worked so hard for decades to keep smooth and placid and superior, contorted. The mask of the perfect matriarch cracked and fell away, revealing the pure, unadulterated hatred beneath. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. "You," she hissed, her voice a venomous rasp. "You monster." I looked at my mother, at the woman who had spent 33 years trying to erase me. And I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of release, a smile of victory. "A monster, no, Mom. I'm just a good businesswoman. I learned from the best." I turned to my father, to Marcus, to Chloe, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. "You have 30 days to get your things. 30 days. Then Carter Homes takes possession and anything left on the property will be considered trash and will be disposed of." I put my phone back in my pocket. "Mr. Davies," I said, "I'll expect that contract by 5. Send it to my lawyer. Ben has his card." I walked over to Ben. I took his hand. It was warm and strong and covered in calluses. It was the hand of a man who builds things. Together, we turned our backs on the wreckage of my past, and we walked out the front door for the last time, leaving them to suffocate in the silence of the house I finally owned. The first hour of the drive home was silent. The adrenaline from the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. I just stared at the highway, at the green signs blurring past my mind, a merciful blank. Ben just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other covering mine on the center console. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He just was. A solid, steady presence in the eye of the storm. We were crossing the state line into Virginia when the first sob ripped its way out of my chest. It wasn't a sound I recognized. It was a raw, guttural noise torn from a place so deep inside me I didn't know it existed. And then it all came out. It wasn't sadness. It was a purge. It was 33 years of poison being violently expelled from my system. The forgotten birthdays, the $17, the years of invisibility, the crushing weight of their lies, it all came out in a flood of tears so heavy I could barely breathe. Ben just pulled the car over onto the shoulder of the dark highway, put the hazards on, and held me. He didn't say a word. He just held me while I shook and cried and finally emptied myself of them. We got home just before dawn. I slept for 12 hours, a dead, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, the siege had begun. My phone, which had been silent on the charger, was a landmine of notifications. 23 missed calls, 41 text messages, a dozen voicemails, a flurry of emails. They had found my bakery's social media accounts, my business email. It was a multi-front assault. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hand. Ben was there, and Maria had come over, her face set in a grim line. "Don't listen," she said. "It's just more poison." But I had to know. I put one of my father's voicemails on speaker. His voice was a pathetic, watery thing. "Mia, honey, please, you don't know what you've done. Your mother, she's taken to her bed. Marcus he's undone. This isn't you, Mia. You're a good girl. Please, just call me. We can fix this. I deleted it. Next, a text from Marcus. It was pure distilled venom. A string of threats, accusations, and curses so vile they almost didn't feel real. He called me a monster, a thief, a snake. He threatened to sue me, to ruin me, to tell everyone what I'd really done. I blocked his number. Then an email from Chloe. It was a novel, a long, rambling, guilt-tripping essay about her pain. How could I do this to her? She was the real victim. She'd lose her apartment, her car. What was she supposed to do? It was all my fault. It had always been my fault. I looked at Ben, at Maria. I saw the protective fury in their eyes. And I felt nothing, just tired. Calmly, methodically, I went through my phone. I blocked Richard Campbell. I blocked Carol Campbell. I blocked Chloe Campbell. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked them on every social media platform. I scrubbed them one by one from my digital life. The phone fell silent. The siege was over. 2 days later, the sale closed. My lawyer, a sharp woman Ben had recommended, was ruthless. The money, a staggering, life-changing amount, hit my account. I stared at the notification on my phone. The number had so many zeros it looked fake. I had expected to feel something, triumph, joy, righteous victory. Instead, I just felt a quiet finality. It was done. The money wasn't the prize, it was just the receipt. The real victory came the next morning. I walked into the Daily Rise at 5 a.m. just as I always did. The smell of yeast and roasting coffee hit me, a familiar, comforting embrace. A few of my regulars were already at the counter. When they saw me, they cheered. Maria, standing behind the counter, unrolled a huge hand-painted banner. It said, "Congratulations, Jiffa." Jiffa, the boss. My kitchen staff came out banging on pots and pans. My new life, my real life, rushed in to fill the space the old one had occupied. This was my community. This was what I had built. This was what I had protected. That night, sitting on my small porch with Ben, I finally understood. The money wasn't the point. The freedom was. The knowledge that I had faced them, the monsters of my childhood, and I had not flinched. I had won. I finally allowed myself to grieve. Not for them, never for them. I grieved for the little girl who waited by the window for a father who never came. I grieved for the teenager who got straight A's, hoping for a crumb of praise. I grieved for the idea of the family I deserved. And then as the sun set, I let that grief go too. It was the last ghost to leave. A month later, a final box arrived. The postmark was from my old town. My father's shaky handwriting was on the label. No note, just a box. I opened it on my kitchen table. It was filled with my childhood belongings, a few dusty stuffed animals, my honor roll certificates, my high school yearbooks. Ghosts. It was his final act of cowardice, a box of memories mailed without a single word. Right on top was a framed photograph, the one that used to sit on the mantel, the perfect family, smiling in the sun on the porch of 124 Hemlock Lane. I was 8, squeezed between Marcus and Chloe. My smile strained already, learning how to be invisible. I looked at it for a long, long time. I saw the lies. I saw the performance. Then I picked it up, walked out the back door of my apartment, and dropped it into the dumpster behind the bakery. I didn't even watch it fall. I just let it go. 1 year later. I'm 34. The world looks different. The air in Laurel Springs has a particular scent in the morning, a mix of the pine from the mountains and the rich malted sugar smell of baking bread from my kitchen. The Daily Rise is no more. In its place stands the Rise on Main. It's our baby Ben's and mine. We used the money from the sale, my money, not to run, but to plant roots so deep they could never be torn out. We didn't just buy a building, we bought 3. We bought the dilapidated hardware store and the defunct print shop on either side of the bakery. Carter Homes, with me as a full partner, tore them down to the studs and rebuilt. Now, a beautiful three-story reclaimed brick and glass building anchors the whole block. The Rise on Main is on the ground floor, a sprawling, light-filled space with a state-of-the-art kitchen, huge windows, and a line out the door every morning. Above it, we built 6 high-end apartments, all of them rented. And next to it, where the print shop stood, is the Laurel Springs Community Workshop, a space we funded and built, offering classes in woodworking, coding, and yes, baking. We didn't just build a business, we became catalysts. We gave back to the town that had given me a place to heal. My personal life is just as transformed. Ben and I are married. We said our vows 6 months ago, not in a stuffy church, but on the land where we were building our house surrounded by about 50 people, our real family. Maria gave me away. We live in that house now, the one we designed together. It's a modest modern farmhouse, all clean lines, warm wood, and massive windows. It doesn't have a single dark corner. It's a house built on honesty and light, and at night I sleep with a profound, bone-deep sense of peace I never knew existed. It is a home, not a stage for a dysfunctional play. Today is a crisp Tuesday in October. I'm sitting in a comfortable armchair in the corner of the bakery, a book open in my lap, though I'm mostly just watching the morning rush. I'm pregnant, 7 months along, and I can feel our son kicking gently, a little flutter against my ribs. The morning sun streams through the glass, warming my face. Maria, now happily mostly retired, is sitting across from me in the other armchair, her needles clicking away at a tiny, soft blue baby blanket. She looks up, winks at me over her glasses, and goes back to her knitting. The steady, rhythmic click is the soundtrack to my new life. The door chimes and I look up. Ben. He's in his work jeans, but has a collared shirt on, his hair still damp from a shower. He's on his way to a town council meeting. He was elected 3 months ago. He spots me, and his face breaks into that slow, easy smile that still makes my heart ache. He walks over, bypassing the line. He kisses my head, his lips warm. "Morning, boss," he murmurs. "Morning, councilman," I whisper back. He bends down, his hand resting on the swell of my stomach. "Morning, partner," he says to our son, who gives a distinct kick in reply. Ben laughs, kisses me one more time, and hands me a warm pastry, a savory scone, my current craving, that he snagged on his way in. "Don't let your mom work too hard," he tells my stomach, then strides out the door, waving at Maria. I watch him go, this good, solid man who builds things. I take a bite of the scone. It's perfect. I lean my head back against the chair, full of warmth and love and flaky pastry, and I catch my reflection in the window. I see the bustling town square behind me. I see the warm light of my bakery. I see Maria, my mentor, my friend. And I see myself. My hair is longer now, and my face is fuller, softer. My eyes are clear. There are no shadows there. As I'm sitting there, my phone resting on the arm of the chair buzzes. It's a social media notification. A name I haven't seen in over a year. "Chloe Campbell has sent you a friend request." I look at it. The small, smiling profile picture, a desperate digital hand reaching out from a world that feels a million miles away. I feel nothing. No anger, no pain, no curiosity. Not even a flicker. It's just noise. I tap, deny. I don't even hesitate. I don't block her. I don't need to. She's just irrelevant. I turn the phone over and look back at my reflection in the glass. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Maybe. But I learned that building a life filled with so much warmth that the cold can't ever touch you is so much better. It was never about revenge. It was about resilience. My old family wanted to keep me in the dark, a blurry, out-of-focus ghost just outside the frame, the invisible stage manager for their tragic play. They didn't realize I was the one who knew how to build the house. I was the one who knew how to turn on the lights. And in this new picture, the one I painted for myself, I am finally beautifully in focus. With that final quiet click of the deny button, Mia's new life was truly her own. What did you think of her journey from an invisible cog to the boss of her own life? We read every single comment of your thoughts, so be sure to leave one below and subscribe for more. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.